Hello communicators around the world. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is about how to receive feedback. When we think about feedback, constructive feedback in particular, we oftentimes think about the person giving the feedback. How to give it in such a way that we don't ruin relationships, that we don't hurt anyone, that it's actually effective and listened to. Now, those are important questions for the giver, but oftentimes we are on the receiving end, and it's also good to be a good sport about receiving feedback, isn't it? This is turning into somewhat of a mini-series because 4 weeks ago I made a video about how to set up a feedback giving situation properly, and then 2 weeks ago I followed it with a video titled Constructive Feedback, How to Give It in 5 Easy Steps. That's also very relevant to this topic, so I'm going to link it for you right here in the corner, so you can click on it if you haven't seen it yet, in case you happen to be on the giver side. But today's video, as I said, is about receiving feedback properly so that it works for the giver, works for us, and that it continues for good relationships. I broke this video into 3 parts, and I'm going to talk about what to do exactly before we receive the feedback, while we are receiving the feedback, and then what can we do to follow up. So let's see what kind of open-minded listening strategies we can follow. First of all, there is hopefully a heads up before the feedback. Like the other person may ask, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Or, "Do you have a minute?" Or, "Is this a good time for you?" And then we know that feedback is coming, so emotionally we can prepare ourselves. If someone just happens to maybe attack your personality in random, I wouldn't consider that proper feedback. I think the best thing you can do in that case is just to let it go, let it blow over, and maybe later let the person know that you are ready to accept an apology. In the previous video, we had an example, a practical example to walk through in terms of the practicalities of the feedback session. So I'm going to repeat that briefly because I think it will be very useful for our purposes today as well. We had a hypothetical example of a young sales professional. We called her Eve. And let's assume that Eve is fully competent, but she's new at her job and is ready actually to receive feedback. Her boss happens to be a bit of a controller and gives her feedback a little too regularly, sends her regular emails about minute details of her sales proposals, and turns them down, sends them back for correction often. This makes Eve frustrated, it holds her back in her work, and she decides to address the situation. In the Constructive Feedback in 5 Steps video, we walked through what Eve can say to better this situation. Let's look at it now from her boss's point of view. First of all, once we know feedback is coming, it's very important to be open-minded and positive. We have to assume that the giver of the feedback has goodwill towards us, wants our relationship to work, wants our cooperation to be smoother. So it's not going to be some kind of a personality bashing, but rather something to improve our relationship. And this open-minded mindset is very good to keep, especially if the feedback giver is not very skilled at giving feedback, because we might end up in a situation where we feel like our personality is attacked, even if that is not the intention. Before the feedback session, we can also sort of mentally prepare and look at this as a learning opportunity where we can learn about some helpful hints as to how to improve. So let's put our note-taking caps on and maybe take mental notes on what the feedback giver has to say, and use this really as a way to improve the way we do things and the way we think about things. For the feedback giver, there are very specific 1, 2, 3s as to what to say and how to build the conversation. If we are on the receiving end, then it's more important what not to say than what to say. Basically, the most important thing is for us to be good listeners and not be reactive or defensive. So when you start to receive the feedback, just listen patiently. If the feedback giver's reality doesn't match with yours, that's okay. Just take it as a presentation of their reality, and it very well may happen that your perceptions are different, and that's okay. However, it is helpful to agree on the facts, strictly the facts. So let's say if Eve says that there have been 8 interactions of emails in which her proposal was sent back, but you as her boss remember only 2, that's a big difference, and that would be good to clarify how many email exchanges exactly happened so that the facts are straight for both of you. But beyond that, what this means to her clearly is going to be different from what it means to you, so you don't have to correct her on her perception. Just be a very patient, mature, quiet, active listener. That is the best strategy at this stage of the conversation. Even if you feel like some perception needs to be corrected or some facts straightened out, you don't have to respond right away. Just pausing and thinking are going to be very good for the conversation, very good for you, and show respect and patience towards the other party. Once you do respond, be sure to strive for understanding the other party's point of view rather than asserting your own. Ask for clarification if it's needed. It is particularly good to ask open-ended questions, so the feedback giver can elaborate on what he or she is exactly thinking and how he or she is exactly feeling. That will be very good for the relationship. And then, when you feel like the feedback session is coming to a close, you can ask for suggestions as to how to improve. One needs a measure of humility for this, because the feedback giver actually might be a lot less younger than we are, might be a lot less experienced. We might not even agree with his or her point of view. Nevertheless, it's a very good strategy to ask for pointers as to how to improve. Don't forget, this is from the feedback giver's reality now. So even if you think you are just perfect already at whatever you're doing or whatever the feedback giver is talking about, it would still be a very good strategy for you to ask her or him as to how to improve. We can always improve in what we do. If you go to the feedback session with a notepad and you actually do write suggestions down, that will be wonderful. That will communicate to your feedback giver that you are really taking this seriously, you are really actively listening, and it will be good for you too, because maybe it will be an emotional time, and when we have heightened emotions, sometimes we don't recall the facts very easily. So after the feedback session, you can look back at your notes. And after the feedback session, the best thing you can do is be proactive. For example, if we go back to Eve and her boss, the boss could try, when Eve submits the next proposal, to give her feedback only once. Let Eve finish the proposal and then ask Eve at the end, I gave you feedback once intentionally, was that helpful to you? And once you've intentionally incorporated the feedback provider's suggestions, and a little bit of time passed, so it's clear to the feedback provider as well that you are striving to improve, it's very helpful to ask for another feedback session. It can be very brief, it can be very informal, just find some time alone, set a few minutes aside, maybe even up to 10 minutes is plenty, and have another little session, another reflection. That will make for a great relationship and show your goodwill towards the feedback provider. Being a good feedback receiver, in my mind, is much easier than being a good feedback giver. Really, what we need to do as good feedback receivers is just be active listeners and positive and patient. That makes for a good receiver in any situation. I will spell out my suggestions and link all the relevant videos for you in the description below. As always, thank you so much for visiting my channel, and if you find this content helpful, please hit the subscribe button.